few minutes. So these are questions that you should have answers to, and then we should just be discussing them at the beginning. If you don't have answers, it's okay, but make sure you write some down before you turn in your notes. So what are the first 3 steps of the scientific method? We went over them for the last 3 weeks, 1 step per week. Put it in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and tell me. I know somebody knows it. What are the first 3 steps? What's step 1? Good, Sarah. Observation. Observe. Good, Nathan. Step 2 is hypothesis. Yep. And then what about step 3? What did we talk about last week? We got step 1, observation from Nathan and Sarah. We got step 2, hypothesis from Sarah, and step 3, no, not conclusion, Nathan. What did we talk about last week? Davian, what do scientists do? What do they perform in their labs? Experiments. There you go. Good. There you go, Sarah. Good. So we have step 1 is observations. Good, Davian. Step 2 is hypothesis. Step 3 is experiments. Those are 3 steps. Our first 3 steps. We're going to go over steps 4 and 5 today. All right, what about the variables? Let's start with the dependent variable. The dependent variable gets what? What's that magic word that you're looking for when you're looking for the dependent variable? The dependent variable gets, yeah, Sarah, tested could be one word. Measured, yes. Measured is the word I'm looking for. Good. Sarah, Nathan, Davian, Joshua. Dependent variable gets measured. All right, what about the independent variable? What is the independent variable? No, Sarah, not controlled. Compared, yes. It does get, actually it does get controlled, but it gets compared is the better word. The independent variable gets compared, gets put into categories and gets compared. All right, what about the controlled variable? Kept the same thing. Yep. They stay the same, yep. And this one still gets controlled. The scientist controls it, but it stays the same. The scientist is controlling it to stay the same. Do you remember the other word for the controlled variable? No? Constant. Constant is the other word that we use. Good. All right, results. This is where we generate some graphs. So step 4 is results. We had step 1, observation, step 2, hypothesis, step 3, experiment, step 4 is results. Data from the experiment are presented as graphs or tables or figures, and it's accompanied by a simple explanation of what the results are. There's no opinions or interpretations, just data. So typical questions this week, you're going to have a graph presented to you. We're not going to quite be putting graphs together because they're hard to do at home if you don't know how to do it. So we're going to wait and do graphs when we get back to class and we get to sit in class. But for this week, for your attendance quizzes and your check for understanding quiz, you're going to have graphs like the one in front of you. You have a pie chart. It's about student grades. How many people in that particular class got an A? Put it in the chat box. How many people got an A out of these student grades? 4. Good, Salvador. Yep. And then how many people got a C? 10. Good, Salvador. Good, Sarah. Joshua, Davian, very good. That's what you guys are going to be looking at in your quiz questions this week. You're going to have a graph presented to you, and you're going to have to read it. This one's a pie chart. It's easy. In science, we use a little bit more line graphs, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So graphing is a visual way to display information. There's all kinds of different graphs. You should have seen graphs up to some point. You guys are all 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. So up to this point, you should have seen a graph in one of your classes up till now. So you need to know about different types of graphs. You need to know how to draw them. You need to know how to interpret the different shapes. So we talked about the pie chart. 4 people got an A, 10 people got a C. In the results section, that's all you need to put. You interpret all of those different pieces of the pie. Kind of like an observation. You just tell me what you see out of that graph. You're not telling me why it's that way. You're just telling me what you see. The middle one is about M&Ms. So tell me, on that bar graph in the middle about M&Ms, how many people, approximately, how many people like green M&Ms? Yep. Good, Davian. How many people like blue M&Ms? No, not 2. 15, good, Sarah. For that one, I just figured out how to do this. You get the blue M&Ms. You're gonna go up to the graph and see about 15. Oh, that's okay, Salvador. There. All right, what about the line graphs? It's temperatures in New York City. So on day 4, what was the temperature in New York City? Yep. Good, Sarah, Davian. What about on day 6? What was the temperature on day 6? Day 6 is over here. Day 6, 67 degrees, good. All right, so that's what you guys are gonna be doing a lot of in your quizzes this week. Constructing a line graph. Line graphs are very common in science. When you construct a line graph, generally you'll have graph paper. You always start at 0 in the bottom left corner. The information doesn't always have to start at 0. But the graph down here always starts at 0. So the information doesn't come in until right here, and that's okay. You always start with 0. And it's always a positive quadrant. It's not like math where you have the negative numbers. Some science will have negative numbers if you're dealing with temperature, but for the most part, you're dealing with positive numbers. You have to choose a scale that will make your graph use most of your paper. The scale is the numbers that go both up and down and then along the side. So this person decided that 0 to 7 was the best scale to spread out the information on the x-axis, and they decided that 0 to 40 was the best scale spread out by tens, 10, 20, 30, 40, to go along the y-axis. So they must be evenly spaced. And then use the graph paper in landscape mode. When you use it up and down, like you would write on a regular piece of paper, it doesn't always fit the right way. It fits better when you turn it sideways and use landscape mode. All right, and then this is why we learned about variables before we learned about graphs is because you have to know the difference between the dependent and independent variable to know where to put it on a graph. So the dependent variable always goes on the y-axis. It's the thing you're measuring, the thing you have no control over. And then the independent variable goes on the x-axis. Those are the categories, the things you're comparing. And when we do graphs in class, we will do line graphs. And then the conclusion or discussion section. This is step 5. It's usually the last step of the scientific method. Very few experiments make it to become a theory. In fact, theories have to have multiple experiments to support it. So sometimes it's called the conclusion section. Sometimes it's called the discussion section because you're discussing the results of your data. Conclusion, this is where the interpretations are made and the conclusions are drawn about the results. So results are kind of like observations where you're just saying what you see in that chart. And then the conclusion would be like your inference. You're telling me why the chart looks that way, why you think the chart looks that way. You should also add a few sentences, about why you think the results turned out that way. I already said that. And then after this is example, after all the research and data from experiments, why do you think the students got these grades? That's not a question you need to answer right now, but that's information that should be in the conclusion section of a report, of a scientific report. So you are going to get asked to do a conclusion section in one of your assignments this week. There's a lot of different information that you should have in that section. One of them should be your opinion on why graphs look the way they do. And then here's 3 more. 3 more pieces of information that should be in a conclusion section. So do the results support or reject the original hypothesis, and why? Limitations, every study has limitations. Limitations are its flaws. No study is perfect. No experiment is perfect. Maybe the sample size was too small. You should survey more people. Maybe you didn't have all the resources that you could have. Those are all called limitations. And in the conclusion section, limitations are usually described. And then why was this study important overall? Why did a scientist graph this information, collect data and graph information? What did they think they were going to contribute to science, basically? The conclusion discussion section is usually at least a paragraph answering all of these questions. You don't need to answer these questions right now. You just need to know that in a conclusion discussion section, these questions will be answered or should be answered.